had kind of shifted and went back and got his master's in education with a concentration in autism spectrum disorder from Arizona State University. He loves what he does because he can see how he makes a tangible impact on the lives of the users, unlocking their hidden capabilities, really motivated to get into the field, seeing the potential that technology can have in the lives of those with special needs. I'm not going to talk this to death, but he shares various experiences working one-on-one, particularly initial experience with a woman who came out of a 7-year coma, and he was able to help her use a computer as a voice. Working with a young man with autism prompted him to go back and get a degree because he realized that while he was exceptional in this area of assistive technology, he needed to really understand the autism spectrum disorders and these intellectual disabilities of the individuals with whom he was working to better meet their needs. So this underlying goal, vision to help people is really profound with RJ. Lisa and I caught up with him at Abilities Expo back in the fall. We left our business card and he called us up, and the rest is history. So thank you, RJ, for talking to us. I feel like I'm not doing us much of a service by cutting this intro short because there's just so much in this episode I wanted to highlight. But I hope that you give it a listen. And I was really surprised by the opportunities in this field because there's a lot of wasteland and lack of people in this space when there really should be. And he talks about the reasons for that. So without further ado, welcome to 2020. Stay tuned for more on this podcast in both the area of TSC case management, special needs content, cannabis, medicinal cannabis related content. And I think up next, we're going to be looking at TBIs. On the podcast, I have Tiffany Goff, who has written a book called Loving Tiara about her daughter, Tiara, who had TSC and passed away. So that's coming up. Just got a ton of stuff out there. And I'm going to stop talking. Thanks for tuning in and keeping up with us. We love you so much. And take it away, RJ. Hello. Welcome to TSC Talks, the podcast inspired by the condition known as tuberous sclerosis complex, which causes benign tumors to grow in all the major organs of the body. This podcast is for those directly affected, parents, caregivers, anyone who's ever struggled to make sense of unimaginable circumstances and find a way. My name is Jill Woodworth, and I am your host. Buckle up. We're going for a ride outside the box, off the grid, down many a rabbit hole, and back as we wrangle a way to case manage and stay sane. Talk about it, compare notes, find the experts, pick their brains. No magic bullet, but we are not alone. Thank you, RJ Cooper, for being on TSC Talks. And I met you at Abilities Fest back in Boston in the fall, and you offered to be on our podcast and tell me about your business. And you develop technology for special needs populations, or how do you define it? You can go from here. Tell me a little bit about what you do.
Okay. Well, first, thanks for having me. I do appreciate it. I'm in a small field called assistive technology.
Okay.
And this is making technology, usually electronics technology, available to people with disabilities or challenges or impairments or whatever the vogue term might be that year. And I've been doing this since late 1983. So quite a few years, and many people in my field of assistive technology look at me as, I'm flattered to say, one of the pioneers of the field. When there were only a few people on Earth doing something of this nature. I was in computer science at the University of Utah. I wanted to do something different with it. The technology approached the Peace Corps, but it was very early for computers. And so I just came up with this concept on my own, and there were a few other people around the world that were doing it. And it soon became, in 1986, the field of what we now call assistive technology.
Okay. What sparked your interest when you were first, getting your education in working with assistive technology?
I had a desire to help people, as I said. I wanted to use it towards the Peace Corps, but that opportunity did not exist at that time. And I racked my brains by myself as an undergrad at the University of Utah and decided, well, maybe computers can be useful for people with disabilities. And I approached the occupational therapy department in the rehab area of the University of Utah's medical center. And they jumped at the idea. They didn't know what I was talking about. It sounded good to them. And they hooked me up with a post-coma patient that had come out of her coma 7 days before, but had been in the coma for 7 years. It was a drunk driving accident on prom night. And the girl woke up thinking that it was the day after prom. And she couldn't talk. She couldn't walk. And they were trying to rehab her. And they said, see what you can do with Sarah. Now, remember, I'm still an undergrad. And they gave me a room, a budget. They allowed me to spend money the way I wanted. And within 2 weeks, I had Sarah using the computer as her voice to spell things on a very large keyboard that I found up in Canada for another purpose. And she was creatively spelling things like my arm hurts, such as M-I, and then R-M for arm, and hurts would be H-C or H-T or something like that. And the University of Utah Med Center got a press release to Utah, and I became this, I guess the nickname would be the Wunderkind of Utah. People in all walks of disability life, teachers, professionals, consumers, came to me and said, wow, could computers do this? Can computers do that? So I quickly branched into other areas of disabilities and started adapting and creating technology, writing code. I was in computer science, so I could write code. And I had to take some electronics courses so I could actually design circuits. And it just grew from there. I became a national figure and finally an international figure.
Wow, it blows me away just because I didn't know your name, didn't know that. And also, the reason I asked you again about what inspired you was because a lot of people that I talk to that work in, the field of disabilities have a personal connection with someone, in their family so I was trying to see if that was the case. And no, it wasn't necessarily, but that coma patient, that's incredible.
That was the link.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just right back there thinking about that. Yeah.
I had 2 relatives with cancer, but that was the closest that I ever came to a person with disabilities in my life.
Okay.
So I was going into this just without knowing what I was doing, what I was starting, and I hadn't really interacted with a person in a wheelchair or autism or anything of that nature up until that minute in time.
Wow. I guess you said you wanted to do something good or purposeful. So that certainly is a noble. So I can see why they were so thrilled to get your help with the coma patient. So
thank you.
Yeah. So from there, I'm fascinated. From the coma patient, then you were came in. I'm just kind of talking it back. Became more well known and were sought after. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the next step was the speech language pathology and audiology department heard of me.
Okay.
And they adopted me and started sending me out to parents around the Salt Lake Valley with my computer, my handy dandy little traveling show, so to speak. And without any special needs background, without any speech language background, they sent me out. Instead of a speech language path, they sent me out to solve certain problems. So
how did you
very quickly?
Yeah, how did you assess? And I guess first again, somebody without a special needs background, not really.
Oh, I had no tools. I have one little story about that to describe my lack of tools in doing so. But I was the guy. So they sent me to Cindy, a mom of a boy named David, who was 7 years old, with what we call PDD, which stands for pervasive developmental delay. Which basically means we know he's developmentally delayed, but we don't really know what the situation is. So I walk in, and David's there, and he's not speaking or can't speak. I don't know. And Mom says, I really want my son to speak. He's 7 years old. Can you help? And being an engineer, remember I'm in the engineering department still at this point, I said, I'm going to teach your son to talk. Those were my wise words at the time. So I wrote a computer program and I designed some electronics so that I could speak into a microphone and say E, ah, o, and ow, and it would move a rabbit through a maze, a very simple maze, to get to the carrot on the other side. With each sound, when you match a sound, each sound would move the rabbit in a certain direction through the maze.
Huh.
So I bring this over about a week later. I set it up. David is all aglow, just really, he's a curious boy. Doesn't have any physical disabilities, just this lack of speech and some autistic-like behaviors, which we didn't know at the time. And it was one of these ball microphones that rock stars would use that have a ball at the end and then a shaft, a long shaft. And I demonstrated the ah sound for up. So I went, ah, and then I showed him how the rabbit would move up when I said ah. And then I reset it, and I gave him the microphone, and he held it because he's physically able. And he opens his mouth to say ah when I prompted him, and I thought, this is going to work. I'm a genius. He takes the whole microphone, puts the whole ball of the microphone in his mouth.
Oh, gosh.
Closes his mouth so that only the shaft is sticking out, but the whole ball of the microphone is in his closed mouth. And at that moment, I went from genius to idiot and said, I need to get some special needs background.
Well, it's an honest mistake.
So that's when
it's not even a mistake. Just
an assumption that I was on the right track. I switched my major from electrical engineering / computer science over to developmental psychology, is what a psychologist, person who sort of adopted me to teach me. And she was my mentor, and she said, oh, you need to become a psychologist. We make the big decisions. So I thought, okay, I'll become a psychologist. So I switched my major to developmental psychology, and that's what I graduated my first EA in. Okay. And it's a funny story.
Yeah, really interesting. You know, I was waiting to hear what was going to happen with this boy, that maybe you'd pull it off. And then I was thinking, like, how I was going to say again, you know, someone without the background coming in blind. And yeah.
From an engineer's point of view, it made perfect sense.
Yeah, it does. It definitely makes sense. But yeah, you just all over the map with special needs. That's just such a broad category. Right. So to follow the timeline, so from there you got your degree in developmental psychology, and then where did that take you?
The different degrees that I got over the years didn't really take me anywhere.
Okay.
Because I sort of
kind of got them.
The commercial world. Well, I still take courses to these days, but I've always been on the commercial side of making a living by creating things and then offering to people. And so I sort of straddle that line between commercialism and academia, where people in academia view me as a peer, as a colleague.
Sure.
And so in 1986, I went to a few national conferences. We have a big one in Minneapolis these days. It's September. Closing the Gap is one of our biggest conferences, and anybody in the assistive technology field goes to that. And from about the years 1986 through 2000, I was a fairly big deal, like a mini celebrity when I went to Closing the Gap. I had to take service elevators to get around.
Really?
So
I'm talking to someone famous.
For a moment, you know, I had a little Tom Cruise thing going there. I was young. People said I was good looking. I was a star of the whole field. And for a few years there, you know, I was a big fish in a small pond, is how I like to phrase it.
Sure.
And then over the years, it grew internationally. I came out with more things.
Okay.
And then in 2000, the whole field, after 9/11, our field really felt the impact of the terrorist attacks in New York City, and attendance at all conferences. Remember, our conference, the big one, was held in October, and September 1st is when the attack took place in 2001. And our attendance was easily half of what it was the year before, because people didn't want to do air travel. And it never really recovered. Even to this day, our attendance is lower. We sort of stumbled along the year 2000 in between these regular not mainframe, but large computers at that time, like the IBM PC, the Macintosh was stumbling along.
Okay.
And then in 2010, they released the iPad, and the whole field rejuvenated itself. It was a great communication device. People could carry it around. The battery lasted forever. It was an all-in-one computer. You could make movies on it, play music on this thing. And that really regenerated our field, rejuvenated, I should say, back in April of 2010. And at that point, I was starting to age out of the system, 55, 60, somewhere there. And I realized I had to reinvent myself for this new millennial generation, learn about Facebook, learn about Twitter and all these things that I thought I was going to be able not to have to learn about. Truly, about half the field that had grown up with me in my field about retired at that time. They had done their 30 years or 25 years. They didn't want to take the time to learn about how to Facebook and how to do other things on an iPad. And the older generation just sort of decided that was enough. And so a lot of newbies started coming in.
Interesting. So that's kind of when you saw like a real window kind of opening up in terms of interest in the field around 2010 when the iPad came out.
What I saw was the decrease in software. Software was one of the big areas that I could actually earn my living with. And because of the iPad and Steve Jobs' model of $1.99 for an app, and that didn't allow any type of profit to be made in software whatsoever. You just couldn't make any money compared to PC and Mac software, which we'd sell for $50 to $100 back in the day. But now I realized in about 2012 that I had to completely move my business over from software to hardware, which is where 95% of my revenue comes from these days. Computer and iPad hardware for mounting the iPad, allowing people with physical impairments to access the iPad. I make certain apps that allow learning from the iPad for people that are very, what we call early functioning cognitively. And so I had to change my business model over to hardware.
Wow.
And with that, other people are my competitors when I was doing the software, it was very unique. Like I said, I was a big fish in a small pond, and now I'm a smaller fish in a much larger pond with about 10 different competitors making similar hardware to myself. And it's a little more challenging right now to survive in the field because these other companies are good and they're well-meaning. And that puts me about right here. I went back and got my master's in autism. When that became about 5 years ago, there was an autistic scare where the numbers went from 1 in 155 would be born with autism down to some ridiculous number like 1 in 55.
Yeah.
Turned out to be many reasons behind that, but it wasn't a rise, actually, in the number of people with autism on Earth. It was just the way things were being reported at the time. And now I do assessments. Schools call me for assessments on hardware and software. Schools still call me all the time for, I have a student that, and then they go on to describe a big challenge of theirs, and they're asking for suggestions. Schools call me to contribute to the IEP process.
Really?
By phone. Anywhere in the country, I can be put on a speakerphone at an IEP and ask for my advice.
Now, when you're getting called by schools, is there any kind of typical call or?
Oh, it's almost always the number one reason that people get iPads still to this day in our field is to use it as a talker for people that can't or won't talk.
So nonverbal kids.
So autism is nonverbal kids, exactly. And autism, especially what we call now classic autism, is the typical type of disability that would be necessitating a tablet such as an iPad to be used as somebody's voice. And so they just want somebody official that knows what they're talking about. Not every school district in the country has people that are versed in this area, but usually they can find out about me, and for a cheap amount, they can get a quote-unquote expert opinion in this area from somebody who has the proper credentials because of my master's.
So then they can have you advocate for the need for whatever device it is that is being asked for to help so it's the schools that hire you, or is it both?
Actually, that's an interesting, sometimes it's the parent that I'm advocating for.
Okay.
And they have the legal right to draw me into the fray, so to speak. And I'll be sort of advocating for the child, the parent, and my opinion towards some necessity for buying the school district spending some money, basically, as far as they look at it.
Yep.
And sometimes it's the reverse. The school district has heard from the parent. The parent wants them to buy a Tobii Dynavox thing for $10,000. The school district comes in and says, we think the iPad is the right tool. What's your expert opinion? Would you be willing to assess this kid by video?
Okay.
Or do you want to just blah, blah, blah? And then I'll be I'll be advocating less of a budgetary expenditure because it's not necessary to purchase, in this case, one of those $13,000 or $8,000 devices. An iPad used in this manner, A, B, C, D, would suffice. So I get both types of calls.
Okay. Yeah, that's, I'm just like the wheels are turning now. I've always thought about the area of assistive technology for my son, but he had a lot of seizures and he was, what you would call intellectually disabled, but I don't think it's typical. I think it's because he was for so long compromised with behaviors and seizures, and now he's kind of coming out of it, and he's really behind with technology. And, I see it as just becoming a bigger and bigger disadvantage as he gets older if he's not able to use it, because first of all, it's the way the world's going. And second of all, for someone who's already at a disadvantage not to know how to use it. And I actually brought up at an IEP meeting that they teach him how to text and how to, use the phone practically, not just. So I can see that this area is, a hot one, and there's a lot there to learn and to do. So yeah,
there is. The biggest issue that I get these days is people have a general idea about assistive technology or about a need.
Yeah, I bet.
But they don't have enough information for specific solutions.
Yeah.
So a big one will be, I want my son to surf the internet or something like, or access a computer. Well, that's a general, a really big thing actually. And so I've got to have them, through my questions or through my guidance, I've got to drill down to what is it exactly that he or she or the person with the disability actually wants to do. And sometimes they don't have the, I don't know what the word is, but they don't have the either mental acuity or the patience to really think through the problem.
The executive functioning?
What might be a possible solution. The executive functioning, those are the words, good for you.
Yeah, well,
they don't have that executive functioning to say, well, I want him to access the computer. Well, what does that mean actually to you? Well, we want him to Facebook and Twitter. Okay, what does that mean to you? Well, we want him to, and it goes on, and sometimes people will stop communicating with me because I've asked too many questions.
Mm-hmm. I can see that. You've really got to get it very well defined, like what's the end point? Is it to connect with people or is it to learn something or, I can see how that would be broad. And so then you go from there and you try to figure out what you can and can't do.
I make suggestions. I always call them suggestions because I'm not an official at the school district, but I make suggestions and I give references and I give reasons why this should be, and I give resources. Sometimes, many times, in fact, I'm in the resource section as the producer of something, and I always make sure up front that whoever hires me realizes that I could be recommending some of my own things because they're so unique, and that it's not, in my opinion, it's not a conflict of interest. It just happens that I make this thing. I'm the one who created this concept, and I offer this as an actual product. And sometimes the idea that I'm both the suggester and the vendor. So very few people, but it comes along once in a while that they have a problem with that. But fortunately, because I'm so unique, it's fairly rare. But that is that, remember I said before, I've got to straddle this line, and sometimes that line is a tough line to straddle.
I can see that, yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of scenarios like that. You just never think about it until it comes up. But, I mean, if you're the one that did the work and it's the only thing out there, then it seems to me that it wouldn't be any kind of a conflict of interest. But so your process from client intake to product development, you just kind of outlined that. An individual gets in touch with you and you kind of come up with a plan and see if you can help them.
But on the product development side, it's a different process. This one is very simple. I just listen to everybody who has a suggestion on what they think is necessary to create. And even if it's for one person in Australia or China, wherever it is, I'll try to create or adapt something for that specific person. And then over the years, I've found that there are always going to be others in the world, not many, but others that have that same specific need.
Okay.
So I offer it, even if I've only made one, just for that one person. I'll still usually put it up at the website as a quote-unquote product, and every once in a while, somebody else will buy that same thing that I made specifically for that one person in XYZ.
Oh, interesting.
And that's where the product ideas come from.
Hi, Jill here. Quick announcement. Thanks for keeping on listening. This won't take long. Lisa and I are killing it making these podcasts, putting them together, producing them, and promoting them. And if you feel so called and would like to make a contribution, we encourage you to do so. Go right to our website, tsctalks.com, upper left-hand corner, hit the PayPal button, and throw us a few bucks. Thanks again, and back to the content.
I can't say no. I have a real hard time saying no.
Well, yeah, you sound like that is definitely the type of guy you are. What is the most unique or what are you most proud of in terms of the most challenging situation you've had to develop a product for?
Actually, that's an easy one.
Okay.
That's an easy one. It has to do with the iPad. It gives the feeling of having this little, like, almost miracle in your hands. Well,
yeah.
when parents got a hold of it that summer of 2010, it became and still has this mythos of being a fix-all, cure-all type of a thing. You just give somebody one of these things and they're cured of whatever ails them. The same thing happened in disability fields with people that don't or can't talk. And so over the years, the school districts, specifically the school district, but parents also and professionals would purchase or get an iPad with a product, a very nice product on it called Pro-Loquo to Go. It's the gold standard of these talking programs for iPad that allow a person to press on pictures and outcome good quality synthetic speech to say something such as, I want a cheeseburger or my arm hurts or whatever it may be. But it's a high-level program. It's a high-level app for people that know what communication is, how to do it, and they just don't speak.
Okay.
Well, over the years, that has become what we call a panacea for people with disabilities. The school district or somebody will buy that combination and think that they're done.
I see.
Well, I've worked with these earlier functioning people since 1983. I started with Severe Profound, and still that's one of the areas which I'm well known for. And they require a whole training progression, a process through which they learn how to communicate. But when you give them the iPad, these speech language paths or school districts think that they can get around that whole progression issue. And it's just going to be magic. You just give it to this person, and people think that this person's going to be able to utilize it to the fullest extent. So I wrote an app back in 1986 for teaching people a step between just learning about making things happen on a computer or in life and using the computer back then as their voice. And I converted that to iPad back in about 2012 or so. And it's very hard to get people to go backwards. In other words, once people have been recommended or given the combination of the iPad and Pro-Loquo to Go, they tend to not want to back up to basics. They want to go right for the whole spectrum. I want my kid picking out words, building sentences, and then saying the appropriate sentence to everybody. Well, that's a pretty big skill there for somebody with a very strong cognitive disability. You would know. And still people think that once you give them the iPad, it's like magic. Things are going to happen almost all by themselves. And I'm the biggest opponent of that. I just feel nothing has really changed except it's a better tool. That's the only thing that's changed.
It's a tool.
And I fight that battle a lot. It's a tool.
Right.
That's it.
Right. I don't expect to pick up an iPad and know how to use it. I haven't really used much Apple technology, but I can't imagine thinking that my challenged offspring would be able to suddenly receive an iPad and start being able to access it to talk. So those are huge leaps. Yeah, I can see why that would be.
That's a big challenge.
Yeah.
These are educated professionals, and I'm giving a lecture where they invite me to give a lecture, and I ask them right in front of the group of the audience, usually about 100 people, so how's that working out for you? And they almost always have the same response. There's a pause, which is very telling to me, that pause. They pause, and then they go, well, and as soon as I hear that, I know that it's not going well.
Not going well.
They would have said so right away. And then we drill down, and they say, it turns out this person just don't understand the communication process yet. They need to be walked through that first before they can utilize the language.
It makes sense. So then are they willing to go back and engage in that process, or do they use...
Rarely.
Rarely. Huh.
Rarely.
Wow.
Even though I demonstrate how you can step back quickly and then go through the steps fairly quickly, and within a few months be to where they really want to be, people don't like backing up. Anyway, so that's my biggest challenge to date, is convincing people that are part of that person's life that they just need to back up a few steps and build on some fundamentals first, and then start moving forward inch by inch, just as we would through normal development.
Okay.
That's a constant battle that I face.
Interesting. That's, good to know and good to have that information out there. And then you have a program that helps with that back process.
Right. I wrote an app, a whopping $1.99 app that I wrote to help with that stepping stone process. And it's not a big seller, and it should be, but it's not a big seller. People don't usually take my advice. They want to stay right where they are. And I call it banging your head against the wall. They would prefer to continue banging their head against the wall, thinking that they're going to have a breakthrough one day, which probably does happen once in a while.
Rarely,
but they just keep doing what they're doing.
Wow. I guess that kind of leads me to what is the most successful or the most, I was kind of thinking when you were talking about the really cognitively challenged, have you worked with someone who, when you were able to develop the tool that was requested, it really opened up their world? Or is it just little steps? I guess I'm kind of looking for
most of them are little steps, but there are some, the consumer-oriented electronics go that route. So these are usually adults or kids. It doesn't really matter. People, for example, they can't access a TV. They can't control their own TV. One of the most basic things that we have is recreation. And these kids, most of the time, have a lot, and people, even in group homes or even in senior centers, they spend an awful lot of time in front of a TV. And they can't control that TV. And that is something that I took on just about a year ago. I started making alternative controllers for TVs, and not only regular TV, but now the satellite TVs and especially the streaming TVs, which are taking over slowly. And that has been a real technological challenge for me to stay up with the streaming TV technology as we get past Netflix, into Amazon Prime, into Hulu, Sling TV. The list just goes on and on. That's a challenge to really bring people that are wanting TV and giving them control no matter what their disability is, even up through dementia has been an area of late that I've been
I was going to ask about that.
Trying to come up,
dementia.
Even that, I'm trying to get to something that's so simple that my theory, and I don't have any academic or even experiential background in this, is that if you give someone something simple enough that they can relearn it each day rather than having to remember it from the day before, which of course is the actual essence of dementia.
Right.
So instead of a controller like you and I have, a remote control, which requires memory, cognitive ability, physical acuity, I make a box with 3 large buttons on it. One is for next channel, one is for previous channel, and one is for power.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So when you give them the box, you put them in front of a TV, and my limited testing with that shows that it's enough that if they press the button, they can quickly understand what each button does. And it's not so much remembering it the next day. It's more that each day they take 30, 40 seconds, and they actually relearn it.
They relearn it. Yep. So it's like Groundhog Day every day, but they can do it.
They can do it because it's a simple enough task, and that type of thing is sort of miraculous in that they can not do it one day, and the next day they're doing something that we take for granted. And it has changed their life insofar as at least control over one aspect of their environment. That's a very gratifying one.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that would be huge. My father had early dementia, and, it's that loss of control, sliding away from you over anything. So, yeah, that's beautiful. What's your vision for your business and the disability community? Do you have any thoughts as to where it's headed?
When I go to these events, these conferences that are specifically for my field, then I can speak with colleagues. And many of those colleagues still are of my age group, 50, 60, 70, and they're still active. And so we chat about questions just like you're asking right now. What do we see for the future? And most of us that I speak with agree that we haven't really advanced. The people that are aging out are not truly imparting their wisdom. The newbies are asking the same questions that we asked 30 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, they're asking the same exact questions. And ideally, this should have been so well accepted by academicians that they would put it in their curricula at the post-secondary school level, so that a speech-language path would graduate as a speech-language path with these skills. That is really where it has fallen down. Most people would never think about this, but we pretty much agree that you really have to search for any type of post-secondary instruction on how to use even an iPad in an autistic classroom. There's only one master's program in the world for assistive technology. It's out of George Mason University, run by a good buddy of mine, Cindy George, and she offers the only actual master's program in assistive technology in the world.
Wow.
It's a 30-year-old field, at least. There are people like me that predate that, but we usually say it's about a 30-year-old field, and you still don't get almost zero of the skills you'll need to use every day you don't get during your post-secondary education or your certification. It's sad.
Yeah, it is sad. So, we're educating, but we're not really teaching people to be active where they are needed and give them the skills to, the lived experience.
So true.
Yeah, of this technology.
These newbies come to me. They can be new special ed teachers or speech-language paths or OTs, and they come up at these conferences. They're like a blank slate with this stuff.
It seems like they
graduated.
They should include a course on assistive technology if you're going into a special education field.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
That has not happened.
Interesting. How frustrating. So it's almost like you're reinventing the wheel over and over again.
Totally. We use those words exactly. But here's a good thing to ask yourself about my field to judge its success. It's very simple.
Okay.
How often during your regular day do you see someone using assistive technology?
I don't very often.
Neither do I. I'm in the field looking for it, and I don't. And every single person, even in my field, that wants to believe like we've done some good in the world, they all say the same thing. Never. I've never seen anybody in the grocery store using an assistive device. I've never seen anybody in any academic session other than the ones that I was called in on using something to access the computer. The only time I see these things that we've created over the years being used is at these specialized conferences and events. That's it. Once you get out in the real world, you rarely see anything. You don't see it on TV, and you don't see it in the real world. So, in my opinion, the whole field has not been that successful, but we don't want to say those words out loud.
Sure. Well, it kind of speaks to the whole problem with, marginalized populations, and not to get off topic and all philosophical, but, people, I'll speak from what I know, as my kids got older, it's like no one wants to stop and write things down that they did. And there's no plan for it. We're all living in the moment with this huge, there's going to be a percentage of the population that's got some disability, but we just are not able to plan for it. And I wonder if it's just the way our culture is so, success driven and perfectionist and, developing a long-term plan with oversight to account for the fact that a certain percentage of the population is going to have a disability is really what needs to happen. And that hasn't happened. So therefore we're all always just putting out brush fires in the disability area.
Yeah. So, I totally agree. I call it a continuity factor when I'm teaching a course.
That's a good one.
We have a real lack of continuity. So the kids might have a teacher in their second grade or fourth grade that's really big on this stuff. The teacher gets pregnant, the teacher moves away, the kid moves away, blah, blah, blah. Fifth grade, you've got no one on staff that knows anything about this stuff. Sixth grade, seventh grade, you get an eighth grade PE teacher for some reason who has a bug up his butt about using a computer. Seventh grade, eighth grade, ninth grade, you get the idea. There's just no real continuity in this stuff.
Wow.
So it's really still hit and miss. You're hoping. It all depends on the support person, and it always comes down to one person, whether they're a speechy whether it's Joe the butcher. I've had all sorts of people be that one person who just says, I'm going to make this gadget work for this kiddo.
Uh-huh.
And so it's really hit and miss. So it's continuity. There's just not a good continuity for people that have long-term needs in this area.
Wow. I am blown away. I had no idea. Though, it makes sense. I was just thinking of like our high school special ed portion of their website. There's a tab that says assistive technology. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'll go look there and see what they're doing. And there was like nothing there. There was really pretty much nothing there. I think it said,
it's like a
candy store.
You would think it's more like a doctor, where a prognosis, diagnosis, treatment. You would think that goes along with that person throughout their life.
Yeah.
But the truth is that every situation they get into, each one of them starts over from ground zero. Every one of them.
Yeah, that's really frustrating. Yeah.
You've been through it.
Yeah, I get it. It's like I can give you case after case where medical records are not transferred and medications are dropped, in different settings. Yeah, the same concept. There's just no continuity, and it's really
no continuity,
making more problems, marginalizing more people, and it's one of my biggest
So they
buttons.
They start over with new assessments, just like a new doctor or a new dentist wants to get new X-rays. It's the same thing, but in the schools, everything happens 10 times slower. The dentist, they can take X-rays these days now, and 5 minutes later, they're doing treatment. That's not the case for assistive technology.
Yeah, it seems like you said there should be some initial diagnosis of what is needed for their life path, kind of, and then, that goes with them, kind of like a medical emergency card.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree. And then the situation compounds itself after they age out of school, and if they go to a group home, that nothing happens. They don't have any of the services they had the previous year, and the people are fairly non-skilled as far as technology. These are, low wage care professionals, if you will. And many of them aren't even professionals in these group homes. They're just they're just watching out for basic needs, and the idea of trying to use a computer or an iPad for a specific purpose like this in a very special case, the kids in the group homes, that's another area that I wanted to put myself into.
Oh, yeah.
Only one R.J.
Yeah, my daughter just had to go to a group home, and for multiple reasons, but yeah, you're really, I think that there's, where I live in Massachusetts, there's some settings that are better than others, and fortunately I like the setting she's in, but there's not people there to help implement technology.
No.
And this is my other job is helping a woman develop a long-term facility for adults with IDD and autism, and providing wraparound support and, opportunities for employment with whatever they can do, or, to be active. I will pass your information on to them because they may, as they develop this, they may be interested in talking to you, because I know we went to look at this. Let's see, we went to this, it was like a extended or rehab facility, and there was a gentleman there that had ALS, and he was using assistive technology to communicate completely. It was fascinating.
That's great.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's the exception. That's really like using his eyes to control a computer.
Oh, eye gaze. That's great.
Yeah. I had no idea. And so here I'm thinking, well, that's the kind of assistive technology that's probably all over the place. Of course, completely ignorant. And so, it's the in-between phases. It's so that we have something on that end with the really extreme cases, but all the steps in between are sorely neglected. So
he's a lucky one. If that's working for him, he's one of the lucky ones.
Right. I think there is a certain degree of luck and being in the right place at the right time and having good advocates for you. I think with
funding, funding.
Yeah,
he's a lucky guy.
Yep.
I get one of the most common comments that people make to me about technology in their environment is they'll say to me, well, you're from California, so it's completely covered with technology in this area. And I say, no, we're as bad off as any other state. We don't have assistive tech all through the state. It's just hit or miss.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah,
So
even in Silicon Valley, you'd think it's more prevalent up there, but it's not. It's the same exact basic ratios up there that it is anywhere else in the country. There are some states worse than others, but for the most part, it's just like the story you just told. It's just hit or miss, just lucky or just timing or funding. It's nothing that you can depend on.
That's depressing. It really is.
It is.
Yeah.
I tell people that it takes that one person. It goes back to what I said before. Many times it's the parent who just refuses to give up, and they've been rejected or had to move in a different direction time after time, but they never give up for their kiddo, and somehow they push that kid with the assistive tech all through, 1 through 12. But they are the exception.
Right. It shouldn't have to be that hard.
It's really challenging them to stay on top of the school to make sure that every year the kid is truly being least restrictive environment.
Right. Yeah. And it's easy to give up, I can tell you, to do that year and year. Yeah. I guess, one final, so for someone that's out there listening and has a child or, adults that has some needs that they think might be bettered by some kind of assistive technology, what could they do? And not everybody's can call you. What is the first step?
Believe it or not, that is what I would recommend, because I've been in this so long.
Okay.
I know most of the people in my field, and I have the time.
Awesome.
As I've said, I've slowed down, and I don't mind the 1-800 R.J. Cooper they can call.
Okay.
And many times I just give them an initial direction to go, and they're very thankful just for that initial direction.
I love it.
I give them some drill down questions. Just they call me with a very general need, and I'll give them some drill down questions to make them really think about what they want to do. I'll hear from them literally 10 years later and say, we made that phone call right after we spoke to you, and that was the beginning of blah, 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 blah. So
wow.
I don't mind people asking. My favorite is when people say, I have a son that, or I have a student that. I know right away that this is going to be of interest to me, and I give them my full attention.
I love that. That's awesome. I will definitely put this information out there. I appreciate you doing this for the moment. Thanks so much, and good luck with everything. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to our podcast, TSC Talks. Please feel free to navigate to our website, www.tsctalks.com. Please try to support us, make a contribution, say a prayer, leave a review. Tell us you love us, you hate us, but thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for more.